So I love my father, Frederick, who my mother, Betty, fondly called Fritz. He was German through and through. And 6'1", red hair, not the carrot top red hair, but red hair, blue eyes, clear, alert, always watched his weight. As a matter of fact, he learned from my mother's grandfather would say, I always like to see a fat man take a roll. My dad didn't want to be a fat man, so he never took a second roll. He never had seconds. And he was never sick and indestructible. And he could do anything. He could fix anything. He was a mechanical engineer by trade, but there always was a way to solve a problem or to fix something, and he'd always find it. And we'd always be surprised at things that he knew. Like, there were some families that came to visit us and had kids, and the parents took all of us to the roller skating rink. And my dad I didn't even know he could roller skate, and he's out there rolling backwards and not doing flips, but doing all these things. And who knew that when he grew up in New York City, Jamaica, New York, that he played hockey in the streets. So he was always surprising us. And I craved attention with my dad. And it didn't happen very often that we'd just get time together. And I was 15, and I walked in on my dad trying to convince my mother to go to a John Wayne double feature at the drive-in, which she had no interest in doing. And I didn't really either, but I wanted to be with my dad. And so I said, well, I'll go. And he said, okay. So my dad and I went to the drive-in. And after the first John Wayne movie, we went to the refreshment stand, and then we're coming back, and there's, everyone else going there, and we got our popcorn and soda, and he's got his arm around me. And so I leaned up and I said, everybody's going to think we're on a date, and you're a dirty old man. And he just winked at me, and he pulled me closer. So at the end of my junior year at WSU in Pullman, and my parents are living in Phoenix at this time, the night before my 21st birthday, my friends were throwing me a party in the dorm, in the Stevenson North, in the dorm room, and the phone rang, and it was my mother. And she said that my father had been in New York City for a job interview, which was a surprise to me after 18 years of being a company man with General Electric Company, working his way up with promotions, and that he'd had a brain aneurysm that burst, and he had collapsed in his father's living room in Queens, and that my brother was going from New Jersey to the Queens General, and that mother would be flying there the next day. And I so wanted to be with my dad, and my mother wouldn't let me. She said, no, there's nothing you can do. You just stay here and you finish your year of school. So that was April 22nd, and 5 weeks later, I saw my dad in Phoenix. He had been in the rehab for about a week after a month at Queens General, and then in the rehab. And my mother said, he's not the same. He's different. He had been paralyzed completely on his left side. It affected his personality. He was an engineer, and yet, finally cutting through that brain, he could still multiply and add, but he couldn't subtract and divide anymore. But he learned. So, and he was so different that she stopped calling him Fritz and called him Fred. So I get to his room. I want to go in alone, even though my mother offered to go with me. And there's a man sitting in a wheelchair with his back to me. And so I say, Dad. And so he turns around, and there's my dad. There's his bright face, just full, and those clear blue eyes, and the crew cut. He always had a crew cut. And I'm like, my mother is wrong. What's she saying? And I hugged him, And then I pulled back, and he was gone. Then there was someone who looked kind of like him, but not fullness in the face from the inside, like his essence was gone. And so I went home, home to my parents' home, and I'm looking through the want ads to get a job, like I always did in the summer between school sessions. And my mother sat down at the kitchen table, and she said, "You know, I'd rather you wouldn't get a job this summer. I would like it if you would make your dad do his exercises, because I can't be the loving, supportive wife and also nag him." And I was 21 years old, and my mother had never asked anything of me. So, of course, I took this on. And when I let me just back up a little bit. When I saw him in rehab, I saw him in his wheelchair, crawl out of his wheelchair on all fours along the side of the swimming pool to get in and do his exercises. He worked so hard at it. When he came home, conflict abound. When I had gone to my dad's office once to have lunch with him, I'd asked his secretary, I said, what kind of boss is he? And she said, demanding, but fair. And I'm like, oh, that's just what he's like as our father. So, and if he told you to do something, you did it. You didn't argue, you just did it. So we're here, he's out of rehab, and for some reason in like June in Phoenix, he wants to build a fire. It was kind of cool that evening, but he's building a fire they had like this beehive kind of fireplace that was white stucco and the raised up hearth that you could sit on, and he's building it, and the logs are like too long. They're like sticking out and they're sitting on the hearth, and I mean, I know this is dangerous, and so I start to talk to him about it, and he doesn't get it. And so we end up having this argument, and it's a childish argument. And finally he says, "Don't argue with me, I'm your father." And inside me was this, I just said, "No, you're not." And it snapped me too, and I realized I needed to be the adult, and I learned to be able to persuade him, to be able to do things. I am the one who went, and I took him from rehab on his last day, and I go to get him, and we're out at the elevator. He's been there for a month. He's saying goodbye to staff and the other people who are there doing therapy. We're out at the elevators, and he's got nothing. He's carrying nothing, which is fine, and I'm like juggling, his suitcase, his clothes, things that had hung on the wall, the flowers, everything, and I'm just having like the hardest time managing everything. And then there's this other item that's the walker that is going home with him. He'd worked really hard on his physical therapy. He was ambulatory. The walker was a precaution. And so I very quietly, I said to him, "Dad, will you take this? Because it's just one too many things for me." And he very firmly said, "No, these people are going to see me walk out of here." And I knew that my dad was still in there.